So we get to indexes and keys, which are sort of they feel a little bit like columns, because typically what you have is you've got like sort of like with stored procedures, you have a sort of a name of a index or key, which is in a lot of cases secondary, because really it's the key. The important things is what owns it. Like let's say it's what table is this index on, and then what column or columns. It's basically that signature is really what matters. The name is really not significant for the most part, other than if you're trying to compare, because sometimes you'll see the way MySQL works it. You'll see that a column has an index on it, but you have to go digging around other places to figure out what that index is. So you need, and basically it ends up being sort of a key. You have to go find the name, and you use that name, and then you can figure out what's the table that it's on, what's a column or columns that it's or part of that index. And then things like, is it a primary key? Is it a unique index? And I think there's a couple others that I didn't even stumble into yet as I was going through this, but there are different flavors of indexes. And then with those, which is sort of a precursor talking about data, is that there can be data integrity issues. And particularly if you're changing indexes and foreign keys, you can run into the situation where it's awesome in your source and your production data that you're now replicating down. But because of the data that exists in your target, if you change that index or that key or add that foreign key, it doesn't allow you to, because the data does not conform to that key or that index. So for example, if you try to create a unique index on a column that does not have unique values, it will fail. It will say you can't do that because you don't have unique values currently, and if I try to do this, it will break. So you sort of get, it's almost a chicken and egg kind of situation, because what you need to do is get the data essentially corrected, changed, altered first, and then deal with your indexes and keys. But you sort of need the indexes and keys there sometimes to help you figure out what data you're going to move from your source to your destination. And this is where we get to data issues are really, through the whole thing, are the toughest things to think through. Is while the structure is key, and it's not terribly difficult to say, if I don't touch the data and all I want to do is either synchronize, it's basically synchronize everything that I can, and then have a list of changes that need to be done where I can't, which would be, for example, I have a unique index in production. I want to create that unique index in my target, but the data doesn't allow it. Have some sort of like exception log or something that just says, hey, you want to create this, or this is something that is not synchronized. I can't synchronize it, automated, because the data has to change in your development environment. But then you would know to say, oh, I'm going to go in, I'm going to tweak my data or delete the rows that are duplicates or whatever it is. However, I address that data issue, and then I can run it through and synchronize. But the key, again, the challenge, all this comes down to the data, because you have to worry about things like, and this is just, it's just the start of it. But let's assume that you are okay moving all of your data or a portion of your data from production to your development machine, which is much more common. It's really, I think a lot of us, if we had a tool that said, I want to be able to take 100 random rows out of production, pull those into my development environment, and have it bring those rows plus all of the related data, so that I have effectively production, but a 100-row version of production, then it's like perfect for development, testing, and things like that. Because now I have actual production data sitting in my development machine, but I only have a few rows of it. So it's not near the size, and I can do a lot of testing with it. Now, performance testing, it's not going to be the same, obviously, but like data and structure and design and coding related stuff, I can get all of that. So one of the things to think about, or that's like the common data issues, is just deleted records. And in particular, it's not really general data. I'm going to sort of classify stuff a little bit here. General data is not as much an issue. So if you have a customer that exists in production and they don't exist in your development, that's okay. Or if it exists in development and it doesn't exist in production, that's okay. However, if you have a lookup of some sort, so if you have, let's say you have like 4 different address types in production, or let's say you had 5. So you had, I don't know, shipping, home, billing, mailing, and something, office. And you say, hey, we're not going to use office anymore. So now it's just going to be billing, shipping, home, and whatever the other one was I used. So you go from 5 to 4. Well, those lookup values now in your development is going to be, it can throw stuff off. You're even going to see stuff differently. If you think of like a web app, like a CRUD application that has drop downs that utilize those lookups, then suddenly, you're going to see options in development that don't exist in production. And that sometimes can be an issue because maybe that's where the bug resides that you're trying to track down, or there's a feature that you're working with that changes because you have a different number of records that show versus what would always show in production. Sort of related is probably one of the hardest things is whether you care about, and it's particularly if there's what's, like audit tables and things like that, whether you want to bring down audit tables, because those can get huge and typically are not terribly useful. The audit trails that you have in production, you may or may not need in your development environment. Your IDs are going to probably need to match. This is probably the classic of a database replication is if my record 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in production is copied into development, then I probably need it to be ID 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in development to make sure that all of the other things that use that ID are properly, linked up. And so lookup values and duplicates are things you want to worry about, because you don't, particularly like if I've, have my 5 different mailing types and I synchronize down to my development, I want to be able to say, okay, those 4 rows that I have in development, the ones that it wants to bring in from production, they already exist. So you can do it the simple way and say the first thing you do is you just delete all the data from all your tables in development, and you don't have to worry about duplicates. You're just going to pull data in from production. But maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe that's what I'm saying, or maybe there's something that blocks that as far as referential integrity and things like that is concerned. So you have to worry about the idea of, are the 4 rows that I have in development or in my destination the same as the 4 rows that I have in my target? And if not, I need to be able to handle that, be able to basically properly edit, change, delete, update records. And that can be tricky because sometimes you have to maintain IDs and do it on a row specific ID by ID basis, as opposed to thinking of it as a table of values. And it comes one of the big questions: all or some of the data. And it goes back to, if you've got a 10 terabyte production database, you're not going to want to bring 10 terabytes of data down to your development machine. Especially if you got a little development laptop, maybe you only want to do some of the data, in which case it's not as simple as saying, okay, just give me 10 rows out of each table, because the 10 rows you have to be able to link to data in the other tables. If they're, you have to maintain referential integrity with those rows that you bring across. Data can be really challenging because do you care if there's been edits to data or not? Do you need to do a detailed compare of your data rows that says, okay, for each column, is the value identical? If not, update it. And then even then you can get into stuff like some timestamps and things like that. It's like, do I really want to do it? Do I not? And so those are all considerations to think through. And of course, it gets back to space and size. If I do it in a way that is complete, is it still going to be essentially too big for what I need? And so there can be some, there's those kinds of considerations you have to walk through. Now, all of these things add up to a very complicated application. And the way that I went through it in this is basically walking through each of these items. If you go all the way back to the front, each of these items in sort of trying to take them by themselves. And that's what we end up with, is that we've got these little, basically these little functions that deal with tables, that deal with the differences in tables, that deal with the differences in the columns within a table, that deals with the store procedures and where there are differences in store procedures, and with functions, because store procedures and functions are a little different. And then indexes and foreign key relationships. And we actually go into triggers as well, which are, like I said, sort of fall into the same as store procedures and functions. And in most of those cases, what we end up with is that we are, if I pull this up, I don't have that one open right now. So if we go into, we end up with this thing that is, let's see, yeah, where we go in and we're figuring out each of these little problems by itself. So we need to figure out, are there missing tables? Or the tables are missing in the destination from the source. We need to compare, where we just walk through and say, okay, are the tables the same? And if not, we have to figure out what we do. Are there procedures missing? Are there functions missing? Are there triggers that are missing? And we're just generating, in a lot of these cases, we're going through and we're getting all of the information from our source. So for like, well, triggers probably not as good, but let's say for functions get really nasty. Actually, so do parameter, but store procedures and functions is basically, we go through and we say, hey, I want to figure out in my source and then in my destination, what are all of the store procedures, for example, that I have. And then what we're going to have to do is, wherever it doesn't exist, I have to actually go dig up the definition, which luckily, databases store that, is the definition of it in the source. And then from that definition and its parameters, I need to be able to, then I'm going to go through and basically I'm generating SQL on the fly and then executing that.